Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the first lecture in our new lecture season. As most of you know, the John Adams Institute organizes 10 to 12 lectures per year, inviting American authors, scientists and speakers to Amsterdam, city of publishers and booksellers. As the New York Times recently said, the John Adams Institute is a modest but vigorous private cultural center that offers an unusual window on American literature and ideas. If you wish to be on a mailing list for 35 guilders per year, please leave your name and address in the entrance hall. My name is Anne Wertheim. I'm the director of the John Adams Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight and Mr. and Mrs. McCourt to Amsterdam. Welcome. I would also, and Mrs. McCourt is part Dutch. I would also like to extend a special welcome to the American Consul General, Diane Androok, the new American Public Affairs Officer, Yolanda Robinson, and the new Irish Cultural Attaché, Dimpne Hayden. Mr. McCourt, we are greatly honored that you have joined us here tonight. You will be introduced by novelist, travel writer and journalist Don Bloch. Mr. Bloch, who is an American Amsterdammer, has been living here for the past 25 years. He will hold a short introduction, after which he will hand the floor over to Mr. McCourt. There will be a 15-minute intermission at 9 o'clock, after which the evening will continue with a discussion between Mr. Bloch and Mr. McCourt. You're very welcome to join in the discussion. I would like to take the opportunity to extend a special thanks to publishing house Bert Bakker and to Van Ditmar Book Import for their support. The camera you see there is from the University of Tilburg. They're making a video for the literature department to inspire their students. The evening will end at 10 o'clock, and thank you and enjoy your evening.
Hello and welcome. This last summer, there's been quite a bit of talk about Indian literature, perhaps triggered off by the New Yorker issue to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Indian independence. And no one can be quite sure if Indian literature really exists. After all, they're talking about books written in English, which is a language that only 5% or less of the country speaks and reads. And the talented writers that they're describing live scattered throughout the whole world. It seems to me that more needs to be said or can be said about the remarkable achievement of Irish literature in this century, and especially in recent years, not only in prose and poetry, but also in the theater. There is another meteoric, talented young Irishman writing plays in England, who this summer has come up with a trilogy that's been produced by the Royal Court Theatre. Perhaps some of you have had a chance to see it. I haven't been so lucky yet. The writer's name is Martin McDonough, and he's produced a series of plays called the Lenin Trilogy. Michael Billington, reviewing the plays, said that they were bound together by a sense that the characters are all victims of history, of climate, and of rural Ireland's peculiar tension between a suffocating mythic past and the banalities of the global village where American soaps hold sway. When you pick up Angela's Ashes and begin to read, you'll discover that this is exactly the world that Frank McCourt is introducing us to. People everywhere brag and whimper about the woes of their early years, but nothing can compare with the Irish version The poverty, the shiftless, loquacious, alcoholic father, the pious, defeated mother moaning by the fire, pompous priests, bullying schoolmasters, the English and the terrible things they did to us for 800 long years. Above all, we were wet. It's a measure of Mr. McCourt's daring that at the very beginning of his book, he introduces us to the Irish version, to a set of stereotypes that he then proceeds to bring to life so specifically and so amazingly. But there's something of a false start in what I'm saying, because Frank McCourt is not Irish, he's American, and that's why he's here tonight, and we're here this evening. The first sentence of his book, indeed, is the real giveaway. My father and mother should have stayed in New York, where they met and married, and where I was born. It's a fact that Angela's Ashes never really lets us forget. It's very strange. At the beginning of the novel, every time Frankie opens his mouth, somebody says, "That's a little Yank, isn't it?" His accent slowly disappears, together with the red raincoat of his mother, and he becomes immersed in the Irish scene and the Irish language. And America becomes for him, rather than a memory, a dream, something to return to rather than something he has left. From the time he has his first paycheck in his pocket, he's resolved to go back. America is a nice warm place for him, with a lav down the hall. When his father comes home with a set of new false teeth, he shows his big new white smile that makes him look like an American. America is the place where you can get an inside job. Above all, it is the world of films. Cowboys and gangsters, true, but also orphanages like in Boys Town. Priests like Bing Crosby, who when they give confession are lenient. It's a place where no one has anything else to do but sing and dance, like James Cagney and Yankee Doodle Dandy. And as far as the neighbors Mr. and Mrs. Hannon are concerned, Frank comments, they are like two lovers out of an American film, the way they go on. But of course, the most American thing of all about Angela's Ashes is the fabulous story of a small boy growing to manhood, writing about a terribly difficult and impoverished childhood, and producing a book that has swept North America by storm, and to date has sold 1.5 million copies in hardback alone in the United States. None of the myths that appear in Angela's Ashes is quite as fantastic and awe-inspiring as that fact. When I was in the United States last spring, visiting my sister-in-law in Washington, she lifted her nose out of Angela's Ashes just long enough to say to me, "Get it and read it." I went to New York, and a friend of mine, a woman who is a movie company executive, gave the book to me and said, "Go home and read it." Even my aunt, who was retired from reading anything but detective thrillers, took a break from watching congressional hearings on television to read Angela's Ashes. There are some books that you choose, and other books choose you. I just sat down and had opened Angela's Ashes when the telephone rang, and Anna Wertheim asked me if I would be kind enough to come and introduce Frank McCourt to you this evening. I'm very pleased that I said yes. What is peculiar is that all the people that recommended Angela's Ashes to me were women. But then again, when you pick up Angela's Ashes and you see the very moving acknowledgments that Frank McCourt has written, he talks about being blessed among men because of the women who have given him strength and support throughout his life and in the present. His first reader was a woman who gave the book to a woman novelist, who gave the book to a woman agent, who gave the book to a woman publisher, who had the good sense to find a woman editor, who produced this extraordinary product. And yet, reading Angela's Ashes, I, for one, find it very strange because the relationships that Frank maintains with women in the book are part of another aspect of the Irish theme. The women are all women in some ways to be residually afraid of. The lovely Patricia, Madigan, that's the last name, Patricia Madigan, who says, "You, boy with typhus, are you there?" She dies without Frank ever really meeting her. Then there's Teresa Carmody and her green sofa. Frank delivers telegrams to her, among other things. She dies as well from consumption. And finally, on the shores of the Hudson in Poughkeepsie, there's Frida, who quite appropriately has no last name, who entertains Frank on the first night back in America. And yet what I want to talk about in Angela's Ashes has less to do with the characters and with the reality of the life behind the book, and more to address the question of why the book had such a strong appeal to me as a writer and the way I look at the world. And I think this is because it is the work of somebody who has been hyper alert to language for his entire life. It's an extraordinary literary memoir, and by that I don't mean how very beautifully it is written. What I mean, rather, is the role of language in the book, of words, of reading, and of writing is so central. Language empowers Frank McCourt in Angela's Ashes. It sees him through and it launches him. Throughout Angela's Ashes, one can't help but be extremely conscious of the way the writer is aware of the power of words. When Frank's father is drunk, he sings, and he wakes up his children and gives them a nickel and makes them promise to die for Ireland. When his father is sober, he tells stories, he shows letters, and he shows Frank words in the Daily News. Malachi, the younger brother, is of course hopeless. He asks questions wherever he goes about words. He says, what is a cow? What is a bowl? What is a priest? And yet that's a brilliant way, I think, to make clear how the world of the young McCourts has been so totally displaced when moving from New York to Ireland. Frank also questions words, but their words are of a different nature. He hears the word perfidy, and he asks, what does that mean? He hears the word affliction, and he wants to know what that means. His mother tells him he is going to rue the day he was born if he doesn't come downstairs, and he wants to know what rue means. And yet all the words that he's mystified by suggest by the sounds their meanings to him. It's also very clear that Frank, as a child, knows a good word when he hears one. His friend Paddy, on the day they stay away from school, is talking to him about Indian women with a dot on their foreheads. Paddy would like to have a wife like that one day, I think. But Paddy, would the quality in India talk to you if they knew you were from a lane in Limerick and had no shoes? Of course they would, but the English quality wouldn't. The English quality wouldn't give you the steam of their piss. Steam of their piss God, Paddy, did you think of that yourself? No, that's what my father says below in the bed when he's coughing up the gobs and blaming the English for everything. And I think, steam of their piss, I'll keep that for myself. I'll go around Limerick saying it, steam of their piss, steam of their piss. And when I go to America someday, I'll be the only one who knows it. Well, at least 1.5 million people now know it. Another example of the way words define people in Angela's Ashes is the word gorgeous, used to describe Finton's flattery. It's Finton who Frank says wants to become a saint, but that's of course ridiculous because you have to be dead to be a saint. Finton wants to be a saint when he grows up. But to describe Finton, Frank says, his sister ran away to England when she was 17, and everyone knows he wears her blouse at home and curls his hair with hot iron tongs every Saturday night so that he'll look gorgeous at Mass on Sunday. If he meets you going to Mass, he'll say, "Isn't my hair gorgeous, Frankie?" He loves that word, gorgeous, and no other boy will ever use it. But what's so cunning about the way Frank McCourt uses these words and these questions about words in Angela's Ashes is that once they first come along as a question, like perfidy, affliction, rue, steam of piss, they come back again in the book, embedded in the flow of the narrative, as naturally as if they're an active part of the young growing boy's vocabulary. Frank says, we see the telegram boys on their bicycles swinging into the lane. They're happy telegram boys because the tips they get in the lanes are bigger than anything they get in the grand streets and avenues, where rich people will begrudge you the steam of their piss. And as for gorgeous, poor Frank, when he's washed his clothes the night before his first day at the job, and is shivering in his grandmother's bed, in his aunt's bed, and is wondering how he's going to stay warm, sees his grandmother's black dress on the line. He puts it on and gets back into bed when Aunt Agatha arrives. She pulled back the blankets and fell backward like one seeing a ghost, yelling, "Mother of God, what are you doing in me dead mother's dress?" Uncle Pa Keating covers his mouth with his hand and, collapsing against the wall laughing, tells you that you look gorgeous and black suits you, and would you ever straighten your hem? When Frank applies for a job at Eason's, the stationers that he works at towards the end of Angela's Ashes, Eason's and Son, he's asked to write a letter to demonstrate if he has a fine fist. His potential boss, Mr. McCaffrey, falls over a word that Frank happens to use. And that word is made the pivot of an important observation. "What's this?" says Mr. McCaffrey. "Do we have here a twisting of the truth?" "I don't know, Mr. McCaffrey." "Little Barrington Street." That's the address that Frank has put down. "Little Barrington Street, that's a lane. Why are you calling it a street? You live in a lane, not a street." "They call it a street, Mr. McCaffrey." Don't be getting above yourself, boy. Oh, I wouldn't, Mr. McCaffrey. You live in a lane, and that means you have nowhere to go but up. Do you understand that, McCourt? I do, sir. And I'm sure everyone who has read the book will still very vividly have in mind Frank's experiences in the library, where he finds Butler's Lives of the Saints, and it fascinates him because it's all about virgins and martyrs. There's a slight difficulty because he doesn't know what a virgin is. But fortunately, there's a dictionary in the library. But dictionaries aren't always as helpful as we would like them to be. And Frank feels like he's getting a runaround from the dictionary. It sends him, one definition is filled with words that he doesn't know, sends him on to new definitions filled with words that he doesn't know. Copulatory leads to copulation, the union of the sexes and the art of generation. And I don't know what that means. And I'm too weary going from one word to another in this heavy dictionary, which leads me on a wild goose chase from this word to that word. And all because the people who wrote the dictionary don't want the likes of me to know anything. All I want to know is where I came from. But if you ask anyone, they tell you ask someone else, or send you from word to word. The real trouble for Frank comes in the library, however, when he has to look up the word turgid. Or when he doesn't have to, but he decides he really wants to know what it means. And the librarian sees him looking in the dictionary. Miss O'Riordan wants to know what word I'm looking for. She always looks worried when I'm at the dictionary. So I tell her I'm looking for canonize or beatific or any class of a religious word. But she's not fooled, and Frank is banished from the library. There are not only certain words that apparently you're not supposed to learn or know, there are certain very common words that can't be said. And the prime example of that in Angela's Ashes, which is one of the single most moving sentences, I think, in the book, has to do again with Frank's father. I feel sad over the bad thing. The bad thing, there are also brilliant use of euphemisms in Angela's Ashes. The bad thing is when Frank's father starts drinking and can't stop. I feel sad over the bad thing, but I can't back away from him because the one in the morning is my real father. And if I were in America, I could say, I love you, Dad, the way they do in the films. But you can't say that in Limerick for fear you might be laughed at. You're allowed to say you love God and babies and horses that win, but anything else is a softness in the head. In one of the swiftest of scenes in Angela's Ashes, and I think that's one of the real achievements of the book, the speed with which it captures the reader and hurdles you along, everything pins on two words. One word and its opposite. It's one of my favorite moments. Peter Malloy, who's the father of Mikey, who is known as the expert on girls' bodies and dirty things in general. Mickey is 16, and he's in the pub for his first pint, and something really extraordinary takes place. The barman is doing a crossword puzzle, and he says to Peter, "What's the opposite of advance?" "Retreat," says Peter. "That's it," says the barman. "Everything has an opposite." "Mother of God," says Peter. "What's up with you, Peter?" says the barman. What was that you said before, Tommy? Everything has an opposite. Mother of God, are you all right, Peter? Is the pint all right? The pint is grand, Tommy, and I'm the champion of all pint drinkers, aren't I? Amn't I? Sorry. But God and you are, Peter, no denying that to you. That means I could be the champion in the opposite department. What are you talking about, Peter? I could be the champion of no pints at all. And now, Peter, I think you're going a bit far. Is the wife all right at home? Tommy, take this pint away from me. I'm the champion of no pints at all. Then Peter turns to his son and takes him out of the pub and has given up drinking and has reformed himself. As they leave the pub, the barman calls after them, "You know what it is, Peter? 'Tis all them bloody books you're reading. They have your head destroyed." Then there's a moment in Angela's Ashes when Frank McCourt atypically admits that language has totally seized his imagination. And this has to do with the first time he hears a phrase from Shakespeare. He's in the hospital, and Patricia has two books in the hospital. One is a book of poetry and one is a book of English history. A point is made of the fact that isn't it too bad that in Ireland the only history book you can find in the hospital is English? But in that history book, he comes across the lines, "I do believe, induced by potent circumstances, that thou art my enemy." He admits he has no idea what it means, but that doesn't matter to him. I don't care because it's Shakespeare, and it's like having jewels in my mouth when I say the words. If I had a whole book of Shakespeare, they could keep me in the hospital for a year. Shakespeare returns again in Angela's Ashes when Frank sits under the window of a neighbor of his and listens to the radio. Plays are being broadcast, O'Casey, Shaw, Ibsen, and Shakespeare. He gets called in, he gets asked if he likes Shakespeare, and this time, rather than the very elegant and rather I can't find the right word, the rather extravagant figure of speech that he's used for Shakespeare previously, of jewels in my mouth, the older boy, who indeed has more of an appetite and an emptier stomach more of the time, says, "Shakespeare is like mashed potatoes. You can never get enough of him." If I had more time, I'd like to take you through Angela's Ashes and also show you exactly how central to Frank's growing up reading and books are at every step of the way. There are some very great readers that Frank comes across. The first is Mikey Malloy. The little young Frank says quite simply, he knows everything. He has visions in his fits, and he reads books. I think the image that will stay with me longest from Angela's Ashes is the image of the three little boys sitting, Frank and his brother sitting with Mikey Malloy under a lamppost, reading in the dark. Then there's Mr. Timoney. Frank meets him delivering papers, and he asks Frank to come and read to him. And the book that Frank is asked to read is Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal. And I learned just the other day from Mr. McCourt that he actually delivered the manuscript of Angela's Ashes to his publisher on the birthday of Jonathan Swift. A Modest Proposal, for those of you who haven't read it recently, is an ironic, bitter satire which argues that the way to solve the problem, the famine problem in Ireland, is to cook the babies, cook the children and eat them. But Mr. Timoney moves Frank very greatly because of his love for books. And when Mr. Timoney's dog is put down by authorities for biting the mailman and the milkman and everybody in succession, and all Frank can do is laugh about it, Frank walks across the whole city to bring his book to him so he won't be without his book. And they meet again when Frank's eyes have become infected and Frank has gone to the hospital. And Mr. Timoney says to him, "Rest your eyes, Frank, then read until they fall out of your head." Even the villain of Angela's Ashes, if I can nominate one, Lamon Griffin, is a great reader. In the filth of Lamon's house, where Frank and his mother and brothers go when they're thrown out of their own house, he manages to find a copy of Pear's Encyclopedia, which keeps me up day and night because it tells you everything about everything, and that's all I want to know. And the extraordinary thing is the contrast between Lamon Griffin's The Great Filler of Chamber Pots, personal habits, and his reading habits. In the middle of squalor, his favorite books have to do with the making of beautiful gardens and of salmon fishing. And in this contrast between the reality that one lives in and the reality of the page, a great deal of the meaning of Angela's Ashes is contained, I feel. The point of reading, basically, Frank McCourt puts most succinctly when he says, when the little boy Frank discovers, "It's lovely to know the world can't interfere with the inside of your head." The same point is made by the head of his school, the man who actually is the only person Frank meets who says to him that the Irish committed atrocities when they were fighting the English as well as the English. The man who said to him, "Frank, read books and go to America." He says, "You have to study and learn so that you can make up your own mind about history and everything else, but you can't make up an empty mind. Stock your mind. It is your house of treasure, and no one in the world can interfere with it. If you won the Irish sweepstakes and bought a house that needed furniture, would you fill it with bits and pieces of rubbish? Your mind is your house, and if you fill it with rubbish from the cinemas, it will rot in your head. You might be poor, your shoes might be broken, but your mind is a palace." The greatest irony related to reading in Angela's Ashes is when Frank finally gets a job delivering newspapers that he's told he's not to read. And then we have the fine day of panic and profit when the John of London's Weekly comes out with an article about birth control, and Frank is then scurrying around the city to tear out page 16 so that no one will read it. Page 16 then fetches a very high price on the black market. With one more citation, I'd like to end, and I think this is perhaps the clearest statement of reading's political potential that is made in Angela's Ashes. And once again, it's a truth that is told to Frank by his father. "In the morning we have the world to ourselves, and he never tells me I should die for Ireland. He tells about the old days in Ireland when the English wouldn't let the Catholics have schools because they wanted to keep the people ignorant, that the Catholic children met in hedge schools in the depths of the country and learned English, Irish, Latin, and Greek. The people loved learning. They loved stories and poetry, even if none of this was any good for getting a job. Men, women, and children would gather in ditches to hear those great masters, and everyone wondered at how much a man could carry in his head. The masters risked their lives going from ditch to ditch and hedge to hedge, because if the English caught them teaching, they might be transported to foreign parts or worse. He tells me school is easy now. You don't have to sit in a ditch learning your sums or the glorious history of Ireland. I should be good in school, and someday I'll go back to America and get an inside job where I'll be sitting at a desk with 2 fountain pens in my pocket, one red and one blue, making decisions. I'll be in out of the rain, and I'll have a suit and shoes and a warm place to live. And what more could a man want? He says you can do anything in America. It's the land of opportunity. You can be a fisherman in Maine or a farmer in California. America is not like Limerick, a great place with a river that kills. The man who wrote those words is waiting to speak to you.
I don't need to say anything. How can I follow that? Thank you, Don. I feel very strange listening to his words. I learned things tonight about my book that I didn't know I had done. He showed me things that I did, I think, instinctively and spontaneously and emotionally. And I'd like to thank the Institute, the John Adams Institute too, and Wertheimer, Paul Siebes, for inviting me here. This is my second time in Amsterdam. I was here last October after the Frankfurt Book Fair, and I did interviews for Prometheus, my publisher. This time I think I'm a little better known because I've had my picture in the paper, and you can't beat that. A year ago, this book was Angela's Ashes was about to be launched, and I was an obscure teacher in New York City high schools, a retired teacher, not quite knowing what my future would be, but knowing that I wanted to write this book. I had taught high school English for 27 years, and nobody paid me a scrap of attention. Then I wrote a book, and I get reviewed in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and you get on television. That's the turning point in literary life. Then the next thing, this time, last year, it gets on the bestseller list, the New York Times, and that's like being in the presence of God. Although it was number 15, the bottom of the list, it has been climbing ever since, and now it's been number 1 for 6 or 7 weeks, and I hope it stays there for a while, because it was sold, the paperback was sold to a company within the Simon & Schuster organization, Touchstone Paperbacks, and they can't publish in paperback in the States until it slides off the bestseller list, so they're very frustrated. And I hope to stay frustrated for a long time. I don't think Don has done such a good job with the book that it would be folly of me to try to start talking about the book itself. But what has happened to me since then, because that's another story. You have certain adventures in your life that you don't expect. I grew up poor in Limerick, and we had to deal with it. We had no choice, and I wanted to write about that. I wanted to write not just about myself, but about the people around me who lived in poverty and wrestled with it. Didn't wrestle, but dealt with it with such dignity and good humor. That was the main thing. That's what people are always asking me. Well, how is it you were so poor, everybody was so poor, how is it you had such good humor? Well, what's the alternative? Go around with a long face all the time? Go around moaning to your neighbors, whimpering, whining, whinging? They say, well, for Christ's sake, leave me alone, I have my own troubles. So, In addition to that, if you have what I call the uncluttered existence, you have nothing else. You have nothing. We had no radio, television, and CDs, books, magazines, just each other. So we had to make our own days. We woke up in the morning and the day was there for us to create. We were godlike in that sense. You didn't turn on the television to find out the day's disasters. You knew they were right under your nose. So you proceed through the day, you go to school, and going to school in Leamy's National School, which I attended, was like going to the jaws of hell. We hated it. It was a Victorian school, and this is what I was saying to Don the other night and to a number of other people. I realize now I grew up in the Victorian era. It was the late 30s and the 1940s, but I lived in the Victorian era, a very closed society, very, what would you say, suffocating and puritanical. That was the Irish Catholic Church in Limerick. If I said in the book, there's nothing worse than the miserable Irish childhood, the only thing worse than the miserable Irish childhood is the miserable Irish Catholic childhood. And the only thing worse than the miserable Irish Catholic childhood is the miserable Irish Catholic childhood in Limerick. So with these various forces, the church and the schools and the poverty, and of course our constant involvement with the past, because we weren't. Ireland had become free, but we weren't looking to the future at all. We were constantly being lectured at by the teachers about the things that England had done to us for 800 long years, and the English were so ignoble and the Irish were so wonderful, we Irish were such great warriors, great fighters, that at various moments in Irish history, we were just about to defeat the English in a pitched battle, but we were betrayed by an informer. The filthiest word in the Irish language. This was our education. We went into Leamy's National School on Hartstown Street in Limerick, and it's a forbidding building. It looks like a kind of a down-at-heel castle. We went in there, and they're the masters, terrifying figures ruling by stick and strap and fear. So we would go in there quaking every day if we didn't have our lessons memorized, and everything was memory. We had to learn poetry by the yard. We had to know the 32 counties of Ireland and all the towns of the 32 counties of Ireland and the various activities and products, exports and imports of the 32 counties of Ireland. And if we didn't know all this, we were beaten around the room, or humiliated, in other words. This is the Victorian atmosphere. You'll find it, I think, in some of the novels of Dickens and D.H. Lawrence. So we were terrified. We were going nowhere. We knew that Leamy's National School, the primary school, was destined for the unemployed, the working classes. And when we went in there, we knew that at 14 we'd be out. Over Leamy's National School, there should have been a sign, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." When we finished there, we knew we were going to go to work or go to England or be unemployed. Then this is how we were conditioned. We were never encouraged to think. One master encouraged us to think in all of those years. Then there was the church. The church was, if you'll excuse the expression, a mixed blessing. There was particularly the Redemptor. Limerick was filled with churches. All the orders were there, the Franciscans, the Dominicans, the Jesuits, the Augustinians, the Redemptorists. They were all there, as well as about 1,000 convents, where the convents had orphanages attached where all the girls sat and made Limerick lace. But the church terrified us too. We lived in a state of terror. Between school between the schoolmasters and the priests, we lived in a state of terror. And very early, this taught you very early in your life to become a very subtle theologian, because the church is such an ingenious organization. It has 2,000 years of becoming ingenious. There are the sins. and the church tells you what they are. Commit those sins and you have a spot on your soul. This is how we visualized it. And if you commit this sin and die tonight, get hit by a truck, you're going to hell. You stole a sixpence from your mother's purse, that's a mortal sin. What happens to you if you're hit by a truck? You go to hell. For how long? Forever. Forever? Yeah, forever. Ever, forever, and ever, and forever? How does a child grasp this? Forever and ever? Yeah. And you burn. Burn! You burn and burn and burn forever and ever. I stole sixpence from my mother's purse and I got to burn forever and ever. That's right. That's right. Don't steal sixpence from your mother's purse. If you want to commit a sin, steal a pound. It's the same punishment. From a penny to a pound, for it's forever and ever being barbecued. So and then there were certain kinds of sins. The sin of commission, which means you did it. The sin of omission, which means you didn't do it. So whether you did it or didn't do it, you're caught in between. And then the hierarchy of sins from the sacrilege, the big boy, where they said you'd have to go to a bishop for that, and I don't know. I suppose you'd have to go into a church and wreck it. That's a sacrilege. Maybe hit a priest. You had to go to the bishop for confession. Then the mortal sin. Then the venial sin. That's a little one. You tell a little white lie. If you commit a venial sin, you tell a little white lie, you go to purgatory. Purgatory? Yeah, well, that's not as bad as hell. And how long do you have to stay there? A few million years. And what is it like? It's very dark. You don't see anything. That's the worst part of purgatory. It's very dark. And then there was the other place, limbo, where unbaptized babies go. Baby is born and dies. They haven't had a chance to baptize him. He goes to limbo, but it's not his fault. It doesn't matter. He can't go to heaven in that state. He has original sin on his soul. And if you're born with original sin, and if you die in that state, you have to go to limbo. You can't go into heaven with original sin, even if you're a little baby flapping your wings. You have to go to limbo. So we were dealing with all of this vast mythology, and the subtle dogma and theology of the Catholic Church, because no matter what argument you brought up, there's always a Jesuit to demolish you. They spend their lives demolishing people with their arguments, with their subtlety. So I learned very early, avoid Jesuits. We grew up to be theologians. We grew up fearing school. So what did we do? What was our only outlet? For the men, it was drinking. Now, you know, it's a generalization. The Irish drink. Yes, they do. They've always had a problem with the alcohol. My father had the problem with the alcohol. And it was the only vice, if you want to call it that I never heard the clergy condemn. Everything else was condemned. Hollywood films, dancing, occasion of sin, all kinds of sexuality. All of these were condemned. Not drinking. One time there was a priest named Father Matthew back in the 19th century. He formed a great temperance movement, and thousands of Irish men and women signed up and gave up the drink for 2 minutes maybe and went back to it again. But it was a national curse, the national epidemic. Well, a man has to have a drink, doesn't he, on a Friday night? Even if he's on the dole, he has a few shillings. The man has to go out and have a few pints, doesn't he? And he goes to the pub and has a few pints and sings patriotic songs and sings about all the terrible things the English did to us for 800 long years. And he goes streeling through the streets, roaring, and then he comes home and he's feeling amorous all of a sudden. He says, "Come here, Mary, come into the bed." And she says, "No, I don't want to go in." But she has to, because she cannot refuse to do her wifely duty. That's what she's here for. That's the whole function of a marriage. And she has to go to bed with her husband, and 9 months later, a little Catholic is yowling in the bed. And if she doesn't do it, she has to go to confession and say she refused to do her wifely duty. That was the position of the working class women, or the lower class women, if you want to call that. So we saw all of this, and we saw women worn out from having children. My mother, who I suppose is the cause of this book, and whose plight, if you want to call that, I didn't apprehend or comprehend till she was dead. She died in 1981. In December 1981, just before Christmas. She always ruined our holidays. So she died just, I think, the 20th December 1981. I went up to see her in Lenox Hill Hospital because I think her dying was a culmination of so many, it brought together so many of the threads of my life. And I knew I couldn't write this book because of her while she was alive, because of the incidents with this loutish cousin of hers, Lemon Griffin. I didn't want her to die. I was quite willing to wait till the turn of the century if she wanted to last that long to write the book. But then she died, and I suppose most of you have had this experience of your parents dying. You think you've anticipated the emotion that's going to come. I thought I did. Well, I would feel grief. I knew she had a miserable life. And when she was gone then, I'd grieve for a while, and that would be it. But when she died that night, 3 o'clock in the morning on January 20th, I found, what's this? She got away. She's exalted. She's above it all now. I felt somewhat like an orphan, even though my father was still alive. She pulled a fast one on us. She's gone forever. No more Saturday morning calls on the telephone. Nothing like that. She's gone. And then my brothers and I, for some reason, we gathered that Sunday morning and we went to a Greek restaurant for breakfast. I wasn't in no mood to eat. My youngest brother, Alfie, was in no mood to eat, but my brother Maliki, who's large, he ordered a fine breakfast. And Alfie said to him, I don't know how you can eat at a time like this. And Maliki said, well, I have to sustain my grief, don't I? Then we had her cremated, and a few years later, took the ashes to Limerick. But in the meantime, that forced me to, I suppose, meditate on her life, what it was like, because I'm afraid I was very late in coming to certain conclusions in my life. When I was able to count on my fingers the fact that she had 6 children in 5.5 years, and in that 5.5 years, 3 of them died. To have one child slightly ill would drive anyone crazy. I have one daughter, and when she sniffled, I was jumping, calling the doctors and the president and everybody else. But to have 3 children die in a short space of time is enough to drive anybody insane. I don't know, I looked at her life and I think she was in a state of chronic melancholy. What effect it had on my father, I don't know. He drank for the rest of his life, especially when the little girl Margaret died in Brooklyn. I think that drove him out of his mind. So that the two of them were demented. By the time when we got to Ireland, when I was 4 years old, and the twins died, I don't know how my mother endured it. She endured that, plus my father's drinking, and the poverty, the hopelessness, and then the fear of getting pregnant again, which she did, of course, because he would go out and drink and come home amorous. And besides, she was young, and I'm sure she was tempted. And there was no such thing. You didn't even mention the words birth control in Ireland in those days, because it was one of the great sins that a Catholic woman could commit. So this went on, and I grew up looking at all of this, looking at my father, looking at my mother, looking at the role of women in families around me, and being able to speculate somehow from, I suppose, going to the Hollywood movies, that there was another kind of world there where there were emotions, that people did kiss each other and embrace, which you never saw in Irish families at that time. We have a reputation, the stereotype of being a poetic, mercurial people, are singing, dancing people. Yeah, that's true at the party. But when you go home, husbands weren't known for turning to their wives and saying, Mary, I just want to tell you I love you. When I went to New York and saw Italians embracing, I said, what's going on? Hey, Joy, baby, what's happening? Good, come here. And having great feasts. I lived in Brooklyn. I was able to look out at the backyard of the Italian family next to me. And there they were gobbling up great mounds of spaghetti and drinking wine and singing. And the Irish sing. I mean, they never gobble up great mounds of spaghetti. They were indifferent to food. We were, I think, indifferent to food. We didn't have any of it anyway. These are the elements. All of these elements that I was gathering, I suppose, these ingredients that I was gathering in my little brain. I didn't know. I knew early. I think I knew when I was 6 or 7 that I wanted to be a writer. There was something magic about putting words on paper. And when I was 8 or 9, I started writing small plays and forcing my brothers to act in them. In addition to that, we had our models were not television or anything like our movies. Our models were the priests and the schoolmaster. So I would go to the Redemptorist priests on Sunday morning. They always put on a good show. High Mass of the Redemptorist Church was tremendous. They should have charged admission. St. Joseph's, our parish church, was hopeless, was colourless and bleak and tedious. But you go up to the Redemptorist, and there was the atmosphere of a Byzantine church with all the priests in their robes and deacons and altar boys, incense, candles, flowers, the organ booming away, the choir singing. It was very impressive. And then at a certain moment in the Mass, everything quieted down. The organ roared and then quieted down. And the priest came out of the sacristy, up, down the aisle, up into the pulpit. And he was wearing a biretta, the 3-cornered hat. He would take off this hat, and with his left hand, in the name of the Father, in very, very flowery, in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, Amen. And then we'd all sit down. He put his biretta back on. Ah, my dear boys. My dear, dear boys. Some of us are sitting here tonight in a state of grievous mortal sin. And on your way home, if you suffer any kind of accident, you know where you will be for eternity. And we sit there rejoicing and quivering at the same time because of the power of his language, his ability to evoke terror. Then there was the singing, Latin and English. So we developed an appreciation. I think we loved the Latin. We didn't understand most, but we liked singing in Latin and in English, and we knew all the dozens of hymns. This is what we had stored in our mind. Dozens of hymns, English and Latin, and about 1 million songs about what the English did to us for 800 long years. This was our baggage in a way. So, and the church, the Redemptorist Church and other churches, constituted our culture, our European culture, because that's about all we had. There was the architecture, there was the sermons, there was the liturgy, the ritual, the Latin, the music. And above all, I think the thing that stood me instead was, in the long run, when I found it very difficult to believe in anything, was the mystery of everything. Because the church would tell you, to give you a certain set of beliefs and dogmas to believe, that you had to believe in. And you say, well, how could when you got older, how could a virgin have a child? How could there be 3 persons in one? How could the Virgin Mary be assumed into heaven, body and soul? How could that be? How could you go up to heaven, body and soul? It's a matter of faith. It's a mystery, and you have to believe it. Well, I didn't believe it, but I realized that when you push far enough, even the Jesuits, I think, have to yield on this point. When you push far enough, everything is a mystery. That in the long run, you know nothing. This is the most comfortable thing that I ever discovered in my life, that in the long run, nobody knows anything. And it's such a relief after all of that dogma and after all of that ritual memorization of geography and history and everything else in that school. So I was, as a child, those priests inspired me. I would go home then and stand up in a chair and give sermons. And my mother said, "Will you come down out of that and stop the bloody nonsense?" Because I was condemning them all to hell. "And you, ma'am, you will go to hell forever." And then I come home from school and do the same thing after a session with one of the masters about Irish history, or what the English did to us for 800 long years. I'd stand in the chair and sing and recite, carry on. This was our theatre. This was our inheritance. This was our library. When I got a little older, I started writing bits and pieces about neighbours, but I wasn't too sure, what is it you're supposed to write about? Because all of our literature was English. There were very few books about Ireland and the Irish. Whatever material there was about Ireland and the Irish was in our heads. The songs and the poetry and whatever stories were passed down. We read Dickens. Dickens was always, there was loads of Dickens roaming around, Anthony Trollope and so on. This was our literature, and I wanted to write something, but I didn't know what it was, so I was dabbling, writing about English lords and maidens betrayed while I was a teenager. I didn't know that you could write about the stuff that was under your nose, about the neighbours. Nobody told me that. That was shameful. And besides, you didn't invade people's privacy. Then when I came to the States, when I went to the States, I moved into my 20s, and something, it was one of those turning points, something happened. When I left Ireland, I was completely, what would you say, a non-entity. I had no self-confidence, no self-esteem. How could I? Nobody ever told me I was any good. They all told me that I was doomed. I was in a general state of doom. I was a sinner. I stopped going to confession because, like all Catholic boys, I couldn't resist my own body. And that was a big sin. Touch yourself and it's burning for eternity. And I gave up. I just couldn't resist myself. So I stopped going to confession altogether. Because I knew these priests would be shocked and horrified. They knew that I wasn't ready, because when you go to confession, one of the requirements, you're supposed to go in a spirit of true repentance. And the priest would say to me, "Are you in a spirit of true repentance?" "No, I'm in confession. I can't lie." Well, I did. And that's a sacrilege. So I couldn't go to communion the next day because I knew I was in a state of sacrilege. So one thing, I was carrying on layers of sin, mortal, venial, sacrilegious. I give up. I got too weary struggling with the dictates of the Catholic Church. So I arrive in New York then, and I'm 19 years old. A voracious reader, but ill-educated. I really didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about America. I was born in America, but what did I know about it? All I saw was the films. And I didn't know how to you have to know how to handle America. It would have been all right if there had been cousins there to meet me. There was nobody. I had to make my own way through America. At least back in Ireland, I had a family. And it was a strange thing to say, but I got homesick for Ireland, for that terrible place, Limerick. But I did. I used to dream about Limerick. You know how it is when you look at the past, you give it a rosy glow. So I went to, I was working at various menial jobs, not knowing again what to do with myself, till history took care of me. The Chinese attacked Korea, and America got worried and turned to me and drafted me. They didn't send me to Korea, they sent me to Bavaria. because I guess they were afraid about of the Russians too that come swarming over through Austria. So for 2 years I trained dogs in German shepherds in Bavaria. When I came out of the army, I didn't know what to do with myself again. I knew I didn't want to go back to menial jobs, but I did have various labouring jobs and trucking companies and the docks. Then I decided I'd go to college. I applied at New York University. They laughed when I said I had no high school education. So I said, well, I've read a lot of books and so on. It was one time I think I wasn't tentative or shy. I read a lot of books. Oh, you did you? Where did you go to school? Ireland. Oh, what a cute brogue. So they let me in. I don't know. I don't know whether it was the brogue or the literacy, or both. So they let me in on probation for a year, provided I maintained something called a B average, which I did, and graduated from there, became a teacher. But along the way at NYU, I was required to write a composition on an object from my childhood. And what I wrote about was the bed that I'd occupied with my brothers back in Limerick. I didn't want to write about Limerick. I didn't want to write about poverty. I didn't want to, because I was ashamed of it. Ask any kid coming out of a slum how he feels about being poor, and they say, well, there's nothing to be proud of. They're ashamed of it. They want to be middle class. I wanted to be middle class. I didn't want to tell people about the poverty and the hunger and the rest of it, and the fleas and the diseases. But for some reason, I wrote about this bed. My brothers and I, we would get into that bed. It was about a half acre of bursting mattress, red hair sticking up. No sheets, no blankets, overcoats. Fleas, millions of them. So we'd fall into that bed and we'd all roll into the middle because it was collapsing in the middle. And we'd tie it up with strings sometimes, but it was no use. So I described that bed, and the instructor said it was very strong, very vivid. Would I read it to the class? Oh no, I wouldn't do that. Because there were girls in the class that I was interested in. And I had told a lot of them that my father was a postman. That's the highest I aspired to, postman. Secure job with a uniform. So I refused. So, but that stuck in my mind. And then when I became a teacher in New York City High School, when I first went into my first class in McKee Vocational and Technical High School in Staten Island. You teach. You talk funny. You Scotch or something? No. English? Oh, Irish. Oh yeah, you like to drink all the time, huh? Well, I disabused them of that very quickly. I squashed the stereotype. You going to be here Paddy's Day? Yeah. You're not going to be drunk and puking on Fifth Avenue? No, I'll be here. Oh, God. So they wanted the stereotype Irishman. However, my background intrigued them. They wanted to know where I went to school, what it was like. They couldn't believe there were schoolmasters in Ireland who knocked the hell out of you with the stick. Wouldn't hit me. Break the son of a bitch in two. So this is how I suppose dialogue was opened up. So they wanted to know what music I liked. Did I go out with girls? No, I went out with sheep. So I was learning. I was supposed to be the teacher, but I was mainly learning. I was learning American ways. I'd never been in a high school in my life. They threw me into teaching a high school. I'd never been inside one. I didn't know the procedure. I didn't know what you do in a classroom. I didn't know what a homeroom was, an official class, all that. I didn't know how to, in the morning, had to salute the flag, I pledge allegiance. I didn't know anything about that. They took over, however. But I loved my first homeroom because they were all Italian. And I loved to take the attendance because it was Adinolfi, Barbaroli, Cacciamani, Iboli, Faniani, and it was like Italian light opera. And they told me, you don't have to take the attendance every morning, Mr. McCourt, but I like to. Adinolfi, Barbaroli, I like to sing it. So I think I began to feel more and more comfortable in the classroom. But I think the main things I learned as a teacher, and I think that's when I write this next book, that's what the book is about, what I learned as a teacher, what they taught me. Unwittingly, they didn't know they were teaching me, and unwittingly I was learning. I was learning to open up, because we didn't open up. We didn't express our emotions when we were kids. We wore the mask. You didn't complain about hunger or anything else. If people did complain in Limerick, they did it with great style. Or if they threatened somebody, they did it with great style. If we wanted to torment Mrs. Collins next door and knock at her door and run away, she'd come out to the door, "Be Jesus! If I catch one of you that's knocking on this door, I'll tear the countenance from the front of your heads." That was it. We loved that. We tormented her day and night, so she'd say that. So what I learned in the classroom was to open up. They'd ask me, and at first I was told by the older teachers, "Don't tell them a thing. Don't give an inch. You're the teacher, they're the kids. Tell those kids stay in their seats and don't give an inch. Don't tell them nothing about yourself." So, and then I would. And then the other side of this say, "Well, you have to be human. You have to meet their felt needs." So I think I steered the course down the middle somewhere till I found my own way as a teacher. And what I've discovered mainly with teaching in a high school, what they demanded instinctively, unwittingly, was honesty. I went in like everybody else in a public situation with the mask on, pretending, "Oh, I'm the teacher." Or we would read a poem. I know the meaning of the poem. The poet himself generally doesn't know the meaning of it. I knew the meaning. Hey, Mr. McCourt, what's the poem mean? Well, it means it. So I quickly stopped that. What do you think it means? Because if you tell them what it means, or if you tell them what you think it means, they stop thinking. So I found out that if we did it together, we explored further. I found out that if I didn't know something, to say I didn't know. And I found out from teaching kids in the Lower East Side of New York, from third world countries, Cuba and China and Mexico and so on, that I had to be straightforward in my speech and concise and direct and clear. That this was a required. I had to somehow get their attention. All of these disparate groups. So it was taking off the mask and learning to be honest that helped me in the long run, I think, to write this book. It took me a long time. I'm a late bloomer. I should be given an award for the last one in the world to write a memoir, kind of an old farts Nobel Prize. So this took a long time for me to find a style as a teacher. Then when all this time I'm trying to write this book. My mother died, there was no excuse now, but it took me another few years, and I was writing in notebooks, trying to find the voice, I think. I was imitating Joyce, and I was imitating O'Casey and Hemingway and Faulkner, imitating everybody, but not listening to my own exhortations as a teacher. Tell it simply and be honest. Till one day, after I married Ellen in 1994, we were married in August, and in October, a month later, a month and a half, I started writing this thing. And something happened. I started the first 20 pages in the usual omniscient narrator, past tense, till I made a note to myself one day, because I was finishing for the day, and I said, I'll make a note for tomorrow. And on the left page of my notebook, I wrote, "I'm in a playground on Classen Avenue in Brooklyn with my brother Malachi. He's 2, I'm 3. We're on a seesaw. Up, down, up, down. Malachi goes up, I go down. Malachi goes up, I go down, I get off. And the seesaw comes crashing down and he bites his tongue." That was the first traumatic or dramatic event in my life. And I found the voice. I found the present tense and the voice of the child, and I was comfortable with that. And that proceeded until the age of 19. And I finished the book. After I finished 150 pages, a friend of mine took it up to an agent, a publisher, and then I told them I would finish it on the birthday of Jonathan Swift. You have to have these significant dates, which is November 30th. And I've promised them the next book for next year, October the 4th, which is the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. And St. Francis, if you're listening now, help me. Thank you very much.
There's a short intermission, ladies and gentlemen, just to give you the opportunity to stretch your legs and take a nip of coffee. In 15 minutes, I hope we can be back to continue the program and a conversation between Don Block and Mr. McCourt is not signing books. He will be walking around. He will sign books afterwards. There will not be enough time for signing books during intermission. Thank you.
And I'm sorry if I went on a little bit too long in the beginning, but I hope we'll get to some of your questions in a few minutes, and we'll try not to make it a very lengthy second half of the program. What I wanted to start asking Mr. McCourt, Frank, was at the age of 66, he produced this remarkable memory of his childhood, a book that he calls a memoir. But how could you possibly have remembered everything?
That was a question that was brought up by a former New York Times columnist named Anna Quinlan, who retired to become a novelist, and she wrote a piece in the back page of the book review a few weeks ago, and she said, she was talking about memory and memoirs, and I can't for the life of me understand how Frank McCourt could remember that he had a sore between his eyes when he was 10 years old. So my God, how could you not remember having a sore between your eyes when you were 10 years old? And I wanted to write and say that I'm very sorry for the state of her memory. She said she can't remember anything, and she couldn't remember she couldn't understand how I could remember things that happened to me when I was 14. The answer is, I think I talked about it earlier tonight, when you have nothing, when your life is not cluttered with television and radio and all that other stuff, furniture and books and magazines, all of that stuff, you have nothing. Then you have yourself, and you have your members of your family, and you have your neighbors, and you don't have to go to the theater. There it is on the street. Walk out the door or go next door. So I remember everything because I think we lived intensely. And there were very, very hot moments along the way. I think D.H. Lawrence said once, write it and write it hot. Well, we lived in a very hot way because when you're poor like that, you're constantly dreaming of getting out. And we were always excited. We were never bored. So these incidents were turning points in my life.
You weren't fighting all the time with your brothers. That's a rather extraordinary situation. At least in Angela's Ashes, there are very few times when you're really having quarrels, was it?
Yeah. Well, I was too tough. My brother Maliki and I fought quite a bit because I think I went easy on. He was, I think, this may be sibling rivalry. He was the fair-haired boy. He was so cute. He had blonde hair and blue eyes and pink cheeks and white teeth, and all the women loved him. So my mother claims that one time he was so pretty that she was pushing him in this pram down O'Connell Street in Limerick, by Todd's department store in Limerick, and this is my mother's story. A long car pulls up to the sidewalk, and a woman gets out, and she's going into Todd's, and she stops, and she sees Malik in the pram, and he's so beautiful. She says, "Could I buy him? Could I adopt him?" Of course, my mother refused, and I said to her, "For God's sake, why didn't you give him away? There'd be more food for the rest of us." And she said, "I tried to give you away, but she wouldn't take you."
I have one brother, an older brother, and we agree about many things, but the one thing we can never agree about is our childhood and our memories of our parents. Have your brothers, in reading Angela's Ashes, come to you and said, "Very interesting, Frank, but you got it completely wrong"?
No, they've unless they're talking behind my back, but they've all embraced the book, and they haven't contradicted me in any way, because they're afraid I might, in the next book, deal with them.
But you told me yourself that your brother has now been inspired. He's going to write a book.
My brother is writing a book.
Watch out.
Yeah. Everybody's writing a book. It's easy. Everybody in this room could write a memoir.
Did you find that is that one of the things you tell your students when you're teaching writing, that anybody can be a writer?
No, I didn't say that. I couldn't say that, because any more than anybody can be a plumber or a wrestler or an accountant. I think, but you can write simply, but I think it takes a special kind of itch, first of all, to write, and maybe you have to have some way of assembling words, a certain vision, and then eventually find your own way, find your own style.
Maybe it would be interesting if you could tell us a little bit what it's like to teach creative writing in the United States. That's something that's not very well known in Holland or in Europe. The idea that students come to a class and someone is going to teach them creative writing. How do you go about it? How do you...
Well, I always took that phrase, teach creative writing, with a grain of salt. They gave me those classes, creative writing classes, and you can do whatever you like in a creative writing class. But as the years passed by, I was able to develop certain techniques to make them think. First of all, the first thing was to find out what you wanted to write about, if you wanted to write. And most of the kids would ask me questions about my life, and I would tell them, and they'd say, well, you should write a book. You know, you had a very interesting life. We have everything, and we're very comfortable, and you had a rich life. I had a rich life, so I had something to write about. So I would do little things in the classroom, like saying, "Jonathan, what did you have for dinner last night?" "What? Dinner, Jonathan. What did you have for dinner?" "Jonathan, it was less than 24 hours ago. What did you have?" And usually it was chicken. I'm so sick of hearing that word, chicken. "Well, who bought the chicken, Jonathan?" "My mother." And then I was beginning to learn about, I was learning a lot. I was beginning to learn about the food habits of the Native American or the Manhattanite. Who bought my mother. Who brought it home? My mother. Who cooked it? My mother. Who set the table? My mother. And who cleared off the table? My mother. And who washed the dishes? My mother. And what were you doing, you big lug, while your mother? What was your father doing? He was watching TV, reading the paper. So the class could see that there were certain practices in various families around the dinner table. One kid said that when her family assembled for dinner, it was the time to settle matters and fight. They fought right through the dinner. Another family would take trays and go off to separate rooms. Another family would watch the news and television. And then one boy, whose name was David, said apparently he came from an affluent family. His father and mother were investment bankers, and they were away much of the time. And I said, "What did you have for dinner last night, David?" He said, "Quail." "Oh. Who made it?" "The maid." "Oh. And who ate dinner with you?" He said, "I was by myself." I said, then I said in a kind of sneering way, "I suppose you were at a highly polished mahogany table." "I was," he said. And I said, "Then you had a chandelier?" "Yeah."
But Frank, excuse me, why are these students coming, why do they want to write? What is it?
Well, first of all, they heard my class was easy, I think. But then they found it wasn't so easy because I pushed them against the wall with these questions. And I think we had a good time. I was having a good time, and I think they had a good time. And I think they were learning. And they would write, because some astounding things were written in the class, and every Friday they would read to each other and discuss each other's work. And I did that too. I wrote along with them. But and it wasn't just the writing, it was what went on in the classroom. The entertaining and maybe confessional nature of the class.
You told me the other day that you think there's probably no one alive in America today who's read more pages of student manuscripts.
Yeah, I've read millions of words of high school outpourings, love stories, poetry, plays, quibs, novels. Mr. McCourt, would you read my novel? Yeah. And I take it home. So I've read millions and millions. I think I know the American adolescent mind as well as anybody else.
Do you think the book that you're working on now is a sequel to Angela's Ashes, but do you think you want to write something at some point that has nothing to do with your own life, that has to do with other lives, with the adolescent mind of the American?
No, I'd like to write a play about St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross. I mean it. And their relationship. It was a mystical relationship. It was a holy relationship, but they were dynamic figures, and I'm fascinated with them. I'm fascinated with saints in general.
If I can go back just...
You don't believe it.
Just a moment, we were talking about how could you possibly remember everything in Angela's Ashes. At one point when you were ill in the hospital for a long period and you came back to school, you were left back. And then you wrote an essay, Jesus and the Weather. And because of that essay, you were promoted. You were not quite clear whether you were promoted because it was good or it was bad.
Yeah.
But you said to me that you recreated, that you didn't.
Yeah, I got the essence of it. Because I was there, as I think when Samuel Johnson was defining metaphysical poetry as the yoking together of disparate objects. That's what I did. I take it, the idea of putting Jesus, of talking about Jesus and bringing him to Limerick. What would have happened if Jesus had grown up in Limerick? I thought it was an intriguing idea. And of course I concluded he'd be dead in a month. He'd get the consumption and be dead in a month. And there'd be no Catholic Church and no catechism, and we wouldn't have to write compositions anymore about the Catholic Church.
It also strikes me that in Angela's Ashes you have a job as a writer unlike any other writing I've known about, and that's when you take on the responsibility of writing threatening letters.
Yeah.
Since then, have you been writing any more threatening letters, or has it?
Well, you know how it is when you get angry with utility companies. I've written to Con Edison in New York, and I've written to the telephone company over the years, and the Internal Revenue, which is a stupid thing to do, because the next thing they call you in for an accounting. But I've written letters threatening letters over the years, and much of the time I just throw them away. I like writing threatening letters. It sharpens your style. But I think that was the beginning. That was the beginning of my literary career, writing threatening letters.
On that note, I'd like to open up the discussion to people in the audience. If you do have a question, please put your hand up, and then if I ask you to speak, stand and try to speak as clearly as you can. And we'd especially like people who are too shy to ask questions tonight.
Somebody up there. The last chapter, well, of course, that's the Dutch. They're the only ones who didn't put in chapter 19. All the other translations have that one word at the end. The Dutch, maybe saving paper, I don't know. You know.
Are there other questions? Yes, back there?
Why the title Angela's Ashes? Originally, when I set out to write this book, I didn't know where I thought I'd bring it all the way up to the time my mother died in 1981 in New York. Then we had her cremated, and we took her back. We took her ashes back to Ireland, scattered them, and had 5 days of rejoicing and merriment and so on in Limerick. And I thought that's how far the book would go. But I brought it up to the age of 19, and my editor said, that's the book, that you're born in America, you go to Ireland, you grow up in Ireland, you come back to America. It's a nice round trip. Leave it at that, and I'll go and write another book. So I kept the title. I had the title of Angela's Ashes, and I wanted to keep it, even though it really doesn't have anything to do with this book. Although very academic people are saying, they're seeing meaning where meaning never was. It's the cigarettes your mother smoked, right? The ashes from it's the ashes in the fireplace that she gazed into. Or it's her ashes, and the four sons of the four flames rising for her ashes and so on. You know, I hope they never use this book in high school classes, because they'll analyze it to death.
Can I ask, you've been working on this book, if we think the first step was when you were 23 and wrote the essay about the bed in writing school, for 40-odd years, and now it's done, it's out there. Does that leave any kind of void behind?
No, it's just it just stirred up a lot. There's a lot more I could have said and wanted to say, but I wanted to go on and on and on. But my editor was wise enough to say no. My brother said that I was very moderate in how I depicted poverty in Limerick. So there's no void. I'm finished with it. That part of my life is over with, and I'm excited over the idea of writing a book about my experiences in New York, mainly my experiences in New York City high schools and what I learned there. It's a fantastic thing to have reached my age and to have a new career. I mean, it's not a new career, but to have succeeded the way I did, beyond my wildest dreams, beyond any American dream whatsoever, an angelic dream. So I'm looking forward to getting back to work. And I'll be back here in 2 years, I think, to talk about it.
Yes. Sitting behind you.
What happened to my father? He stayed in England for a while, and then he went back to Northern Ireland, where he was working on farms as a labourer. And then I saw him in 1963. He tried to have a reconciliation with my mother. He came to New York. My mother was living in Brooklyn. And he said, I'm a new man now, he said in the letter. I haven't had a drink in 3 years, and I have a job. I'm working in a monastery as a chef. And I said, what if he's a chef in a monastery? Their main diet must be bread and water, because he couldn't cook. So he arrives in New York on the Queen Mary, and in the 3 weeks that he was in New York, he made up for 3 years of abstinence and drank all over Brooklyn and went back. And then I saw him again in 1971 when Belfast was going up in flames. And he just sat there in his little flat in Andersonstown. The next time I saw him, he was dead. I went to his funeral in 1985. That's it.
Does it feel odd for you to be talking about or writing about very private and intimate things in your life and going public with them?
I think I started going public when I became a teacher. I defied all the injunctions of the older teachers. Don't tell them a thing about yourself, though you're private. Don't tell them a thing about your private life, because I found that was artificial. I couldn't go into the classroom and be the Irish schoolmaster. So I began to not much of. I didn't tell them much of the stuff that's in the book, but the confessional, I began to become a little more open as a teacher, so I think that spilled over into the book.
No, excuse me, the book is dedicated to Mr. McCourt's brothers.
There are acknowledgements. Yeah. He was an intelligent man. Maybe he was mad, but he was intelligent, and he had a great store of songs and stories, and a strong. I think the saddest thing about him is that he was born at the wrong time, or that even though he was involved in the struggle for Irish independence when he was younger, I think the saddest thing in his life was that he wasn't captured by the British and hanged. He'd love to have been hanged. He would have gone to his death singing, I do this for Ireland, like Roddy McCauley and Kevin Barry and the rest of the heroes. So he lived, and he came to New York and met my mother, and the worst thing that ever happened to my mother was meeting him. If she'd met some other man, she might have had some kind of a decent life. The worst thing that happened to him was meeting my mother. And maybe, but then I wouldn't be here. But he wasn't fit for marriage. He didn't know. I don't think he knew how to be a husband.
You said the very interesting thing the other day, that you think the basis of a good marriage is having a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Were your parents humorless?
No, he had a sense of humor, and she had a sense of humor, but between them came the bottle. And the bottle was what nearly destroyed all of us, the drink.
Are there any other? Yes?
Have I had any reactions from the Irish? Oh, yeah. Well, a priest wrote a long article in the Limerick Leader, picking the book apart and denouncing me generally. He said things like, well, he said, that Mr. McCourt doesn't know the Angelus never rings at midnight. I beg to differ, Father. On New Year's Eve it does, and that's when I said it. But then he said that I had insulted my mother and so on. Otherwise, I've had nothing but positive reaction. For instance, I've developed a filing system at home in New York where I have a file now for that's an SOL file and an MOL file. The SOL is for sweet old ladies, and the MOL is for mean old ladies. And I have a file for nuns and priests. And all the letters from the nuns and priests are positive. So one priest wrote to me, from a retired priest in Arizona, and I think he's 82 years old, and he said, the single worst, he wasn't Irish, the single worst thing that ever happened to the Catholic Church was the massive importation of Irish priests and bishops because they put a puritanical pall on the Irish Catholic Church. So he agreed with me.
All the way in the back. Please stand.
Was it a pleasure? Well, some days it was a pleasure because especially writing about characters I knew in Limerick. But the part that I really didn't want to write was about my father and mother. My father going off to England and not coming back, and my mother having to go off and beg from the dispensary in the St. Vincent de Paul Society. Trying to go back into that was very difficult, and there are days I didn't want to get out of bed. I just knew, and I knew I had to do it. I thought, well, maybe I'll skip that part. Then I knew if I skipped that part, there would be a hole in the book, and I wanted to build up the sense of the humiliation, particularly that my mother had suffered, and that filtered down to us. I wouldn't want to do it again.
I think we have time for about 3 more questions. So please, if you're feeling very, very shy, ask a question. Go ahead. I'm afraid we can't hear you.
Eyes. Or do I have problems with my eyes? No. What? Yeah. Oh, my eyes are fine. I lost all the lashes on the lower lids, but and when the wind is blowing, everything in the world winds up in my eyes. But my sight is fine, and I think it cleared up when I reached about the age of 50. Everything cleared up.
In the first balcony, yes.
There clearly been many exemplary women in your life. Could you tell me whether there have been any exemplary men?
Yeah, well, that one teacher in Leamy's National School, Mr. O'Halloran, who encouraged me and told me, think for myself and go to America. And he taught, well, I didn't put it in the book because I was too modest, but he announced to the class one day after I wrote something, and I'm really almost too modest to tell you this, my boy, my boy, you are a literary genius. So you can imagine how they tormented me in the schoolyard after that for a year. Oh, look at the literary genius. What are you saying today, literary genius? So he what's that? Oh yeah. I put up, I endured. Otherwise, when I went to New York University then, I expected men and women of great scholarship who love wisdom and who love to teach, and I found a bunch of hacks. And I think there was only one professor in my whole career that I admired, and that's out of dozens and dozens of them. So I thought when I became a teacher myself, I'd try to do better than that. But otherwise, anyone I admire is in a book. St. Francis of Assisi. He's my main man.
P.G. Wodehouse.
P.G. Wodehouse, yeah, for his writing.
And the last question. We'll have 3 more questions if they're short questions.
What's that?
Writers that you admire most.
Well, as I was telling Don the other night, I think the first writer that I became involved with and obsessed with was P.G. Wodehouse. I don't know if you know his work, Jeeves and Bertie Wooster and that crowd, but he had great style and he was hilarious. So, and he was his work dealt with subjects completely different from the way we grew up in Limerick. And then I read, early in my life, I read a book called Tom Brown's School Days, which affected me, for some reason, very heavily. And then there was a whole series by C.S. Forster, the sea stories of C.S. That I could go on. Shakespeare, whom I discovered later on in life, and Dickens.
Perhaps you could tell what you told me the other night about that remarkable woman who learned English from Shakespeare.
A man that I knew from Hungary,
Yeah.
who learned English by studying Shakespeare and using a dictionary in Hungary. So when he came to New York with his little daughter, he had taught her English, and they spoke in very stately terms. And when he admonished her about something, as if he were talking to Ophelia. And I love to take him to parties, because people thought he was putting on an act. I said, no, that's the way he talks.
Down here to the right, in the first row.
How much do you blame Limerick for your upbringing, and do you think Limerick has changed?
Well, secondly, Limerick has changed. I've been back in this. The main thing about Limerick now is there's a university there, and it's the presence of these young people who have given the city a vibrancy. Also, it's become very prosperous. There's tremendous building going along the River Shannon, and of course, it's accompanied by the usual characteristics of a booming economy: drugs, violence, crime, and the pollution of the environment. But all in all, I prefer to be in the Limerick we have now, because the young are traveling. They're all over Europe. They're all over the United States. The television is an opening up to the world. They have free access to books. Censorship has disappeared, and there was
not in Ireland.
Yeah, well, there is some censorship, but it's not as you can get anything you want. You can even get condoms in Chinese restaurants.
But you can't write about them in the newspaper.
What's that?
I'm thinking about the episode as recently as, was it 1965, McKern's novel The Dark, where he wrote about masturbation and
Oh yeah. Oh well, now you can write about anything nowadays in Ireland. It's opened up.
Should we in retrospect bless your poverty? Otherwise we would not have had the book. Was the book this book?
Should we in retrospect bless the poverty, because otherwise we wouldn't have had this book?
I mean, if you would be known to be Frank Rothschild, would you have written the book?
No, it's like the choice that Achilles was offered. The choice of live a short and glorious life, or live a long time, an old man, and die in peace. So he chose the short and glorious life. Well, I've lived a long time. I think I've never said this before. I've lived a long time, maybe too long, some people would say. But I think I can't say that the misery that I endured was worth it. But in the last 2 or 3 years, my life has been storybook. Only good things are happening to me. And I don't understand it. I'm Irish. I'm waiting for the bad thing to happen.
I think that's perhaps a very appropriate note to close on. I'm sorry we don't have time for...
Thank you.
If you have any more burning questions, you can always ask now, later, when you wait for a drink. Thank you, Frank McCourt and Don Bloch, for sharing with us the hidden treasures of Angela's ashes. Please stay a while. Our next lecture will be with Edmund White and David Levitt on 8 October. Have your book signed. Stay a while, have a drink, ask your questions now, and thank you. Hope to see you again. Thank you.